Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Leadership Speak series at L4. Today, I have the privilege and pleasure to welcome a very old friend, a very good friend of mine from my past life, Srikanth Iyengar, CEO of Workforce Development at Upgrad. Welcome to the show, Srikanth.
Hey Ringo, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise, Srikanth, and it's a joy to meet with you. And while we haven't met in person for almost 2 decades, but thanks to technology, here we are once more chatting like we just met last week. So thank you so much for joining us on the show. And I think your perspective on what we're going to discuss today will be of a lot of interest to many of our audiences. As I might have shared, L Forum is really a, let's say, a platform for academics, entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial leaders, and then anyone who's interested in the entrepreneurial leadership realm. And I think you are a shining example of that journey. So without further ado, I'd like to kind of get started by asking you to give us a little perspective on your journey as a leader and how you have, your journey so far, basically.
Well, Ringo, first of all, thank you. And you've set the bar very high. So, I hope I live up to it. I don't think I'm a shiny example. All the shine is maybe how much I've scrubbed my face this morning. But
the more information than the people need to know. I hired you once, so I'm sure you're a shiny example.
That is correct. And yes, I do thank you for that. I'm not sure whether it's reciprocated, but that aside, look, let me talk you through my experience. I've been very fortunate through my career. I think my professional journey has spanned multiple dimensions. And let me add some color. I started my career in CPG or FMCG, as they call it in Asia. Moved to the US in tech services when you hired me in the company that we both worked for back in the day. And I moved with that company after a while to Europe as well, and then spent time in tech services for almost 20 years. And in the last couple of years, I've moved to edtech or tech learning, as you'd call it. So clearly, it's been 3 different industry experiences for me, spanning 3 different continents: Asia, North America, and Europe. But I think my journey as a leader, and I was thinking through how best to describe it. I think it's gone from being what you'd call an individual contributor, where one does something oneself, to someone who leads a team of similar individual contributors, people who probably have similar skills to you, but maybe less experience. So you're sort of doing with them, but also giving them a sense of how it's done. From there, you sort of, I've moved to what I'd call P&L or divisional roles, where I've run cross-functional teams, which is more about being the glue to getting an operation together, to at the end being a truly executive, where you're making impact at a corporate or as an organizational level. So that's sort of been my journey, and I think it's been it has its share of ups and downs, its bumps, but very, very enriching. I think that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think you've been very modest, but I guess the journey has been very interesting. Some of the firms you worked with were dealing in the millions. Before you left them, they were starting to deal in billions. So obviously you had a hand in that journey as well. So which kind of brings me kind of to what we want to discuss today is about empowerment. The concept of empowerment is very interesting to many, and I don't know how many of us truly practice it. So I would love your perspective in terms of what you think empowerment is, and have you experienced empowerment? What your definition of empowerment is?
No, I have, and like you said, the company that we both work for, which we're both very fond of even today, I think there's a lot of positive vibes, was a company which was in the millions when we were there, and a company which is hugely successful global in the billions today, and that's probably a very good example. I think one of the key things that company and a lot of other very successful companies in the world have done, I've been part of, is empower people at all levels. And this sounds like a very pithy statement, but let me talk about what I think empowerment means. The success of a company is often not driven in a boardroom. Yes, boardrooms make decisions, but the success is driven at the front lines or at the tip of the spear, as they call it. So Every day you've got a bunch of people. They could be selling a service, they could be delivering a service, they're interacting with customers, they're interacting with other stakeholders. And each of those people stands as the embodiment or the ambassador for what that company and the company's brand stands for. And it's very important that all of those people feel like they represent the company as a whole and they assume a certain level of empowerment or ownership. And I think that's when empowerment is at its best, when people feel an instinctive sense of ownership that, hey, I know what I've got to do, and this is what I do, whether it be even cleaning a conference table very cleanly, whether it be, signing a deal with the client, whether it be hiring the right person for the company. Each of those things adds value to the company as a whole. And having a sense of what that does and taking pride in it and making the right decisions, to me, is empowerment, right? It has multiple positive effects. One, it motivates people. And a motivated organization is often a big asset, for probably undervalued. It also promotes a certain level of risk taking within a framework. And look, the world is a competitive place, and you're never going to be the only player in your space. And so if you've got to grow a little faster, do a little better, you've got to take a bit of risk. And empowerment allows people to take that risk within a certain framework, as I said. And I think it also, to a certain extent, shows your stakeholders that you can move faster, you're more nimble, because decisions are made at that point of contact if there's empowerment. Otherwise, if you've got to keep referring back 2 levels, 3 levels, 4 levels in the organization, it sends a message that, A, this company doesn't care about me if you're a stakeholder of the company, and B, I'm not sure whether this company is the right one for me as well because they're too slow, right? So I just to summarize, I'd say motivation, risk-taking in a good way, success, and focus on the right outcomes is probably what empowerment drives.
That's very succinctly put. Very nice, and I think I love that concept of tying the motivation, agility, and promoting risk taking. I think they all go hand in hand. Uh, what are the major benefits of empowerment? Have you experienced any war stories from your life where
Yep. No, so let me give you an example. So this is fairly early in my career. There was this client. We'd been talking to, not client, prospect. We'd been talking to this prospect for 2 or 3 years. We were a tech services company trying to get our brand in front of them, show them that we're the next best thing since sliced bread. But there were 100 of us trying to do it, and it just so happened that we had an opportunity to get a meeting with the CEO of that company, and not just a general relationship meeting, but a meeting based on something that we as a company thought we could do. Okay. Now, of course, we pitched this particular proposition at 2 or 3 levels below in other companies. But in this case, I had a very small window of opportunity to write to the CEO of that company and secure an interaction on the basis that we can do it. We hadn't done it before, right? But we thought we could as a company. And I had to go back and tell this guy that, hey, we can do it. Can we meet with you? Now, I was making a commitment in that meeting on the back of the CEO of our company, saying that our CEO is going to show up and talk about what we can do. Now, in most other companies, I would probably have reached out to the CEO's office, which happened. I mean, the whole office was in a different time zone in a different country, which meant it's a 24-hour, 48-hour cycle, and then go back to the client, by which time I might have lost the window, as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
I had to make a choice. Now, in most other companies, I might have thought twice, but in this particular company, I just said, yes, I know I'll get supported. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to make the commitment. I'm going to say that if we get this, the CEO will show up. And that's exactly what I did. I went back, we got the meeting. I went back to our CEO and said, hey, we've done this. Now you've got to show up. And this is what we're going to talk about. Now, this can be a career limiting move.
Absolutely.
But the fact, and I'm not praising myself here, the fact that I did that without thinking twice, and also the fact that probably most of my colleagues in that same position would have done the same thing, to me says that this was a culture in which empowerment was really provided. because
Awesome.
we all believed that as long as we were doing what is right for the company and doing it with the right mindset, we would be supported no matter what.
Awesome. And so the climax is, did you win that deal or?
We did. We actually signed them as a client. We did.
That's good.
You
Happy
know,
endings are always great. So
happy endings are great. If I remember correctly, they're probably still a client for that company. Yes.
wow, that's something. That says a lot about how. Yeah, I believe that too, because empowerment, as you mentioned earlier, the ability to take the risk, right? Because you feel the firm believes in your decision capabilities and your management style. And I think it kind of speaks to a lot of things, including the way the kind of selection you have, the kind of people you bring into the team who are aligned to the common vision and so on. So, but of course, there are two sides to a coin, Srikanth. Have you ever experienced challenges because of empowerment? Has that kind of come and bitten you also?
It does, and it probably boils down to two areas. I mean, there are many cases where the empowerment leads to outcomes or consequences that one wouldn't desire, and that happens. That's the nature of business. You're never going to get it right? So I think there are two things that I would want to really watch out for. People will get things wrong. That's the first thing. You have to accept it. That when you empower people, they will make mistakes that you think that you might not have made, or they'll make decisions that you may not have made in that position. But the moment you empower people, you've got to be willing to live with it. Things will go wrong. So it's all very well to say that, look, the whole organization is empowered, but if you start penalizing people who make mistakes, then you're not practicing what you preach. That's the first part. I'd say you have to go into the mindset that things will go wrong, but that's part of growing as a company. That's part of all of us growing as individuals, and let's accept it. As long as those mistakes are made in the right spirit, to me that's important. And as long as you learn from it, so that's the first part. And I'll give you another example very, very early in my career. And this is where I made a mistake. So this is my first job in India, and I was just 1 year out of college. I was an assistant brand manager with this huge brand, and I had a few $100,000 of an advertising budget to spend in a particular month. A few $100,000 in India, so you can imagine what it was in Indian rupees. And my boss at that time said to me, "You know what? I'm going to let you run with this. You figure it out. I want to see how you deal with it." I've never done a proper campaign launch like this before. I sweated the small stuff. I did everything right, etc. But now India is a complex market. I got the languages wrong. Sheer inexperience. So, small things like when you're getting advertising billboards ready for different states, I got the sizes wrong for the wrong languages. So essentially, I blew up a few $100,000.
Wow.
Now, I was pretty sure I was going to get fired the next day. Stuff happens. And my boss at that time sat through with me, walked through what happened, and he realized that this was a genuine mistake. And he said, "You know what? One, this is how we're going to reuse what you've done, because it's not a complete waste. We'll figure out how it should." And secondly, he said, "It's a learning experience. Just make sure you don't do it again." Because he says you did what you thought was right, and you just didn't have the hindsight of experience. To me, that was a huge, huge vote of confidence that you can make mistakes. And frankly, that was defining in my career, because I've probably tried to do that for people who work with me whenever I try to empower them.
So, what was your learning, Srikanth? What did you walk away with that experience? Because obviously, you must have felt miserable at that point of time. But once all the grounds to.
I think there were probably a few things. One was, I think it taught me to really get into. I mean, I always thought I was a detail-oriented guy, but on the big things, I realized that attention to detail is important. I mean, it probably reinforced that, very critical, especially when you're empowered, because then you've got to take ownership for what the decisions you're making, right? In that sense. The second thing I thought was, when you make a mistake, you try and make the most of what's at the end of it. No mistake is ever 100% loss or 100% waste. You can do something with it. You can recover in some shape or form. And I think that was a big learning for me, that what's done is done. Recriminations have their place, but they can be done at a different time and place. What's got to be focused on is what do you do going forward. I mean, there's a very famous statement. So when the Lisbon earthquake of 1665 happened, the Marquis de Pombal was the prime minister or the de facto leader of Portugal. And the next morning, when one third of the city of Lisbon was destroyed, and the key townfolk came to him and said, "So what do we do now?" And people were distraught. People were dead, buildings ruined. And he said, "Let's start with burying the dead and feeding the living."
Wow, beautifully said.
You what's done is done. You've got to look on what you do going forward. So that was the second lesson for me. And I think the third lesson for me was honestly, when you have a boss, a manager, a team, an organization that places that level of trust in you, it builds a certain emotional connect that doesn't go away to this day. I mean, even today, I feel fondly about that company I'm talking about, because you feel a sense of loyalty which transcends how much you get paid. It transcends what level you are at in the organization, etc., etc. Because as people remember how you made them feel, they don't really remember what you paid them.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I believe empowerment's a little heady. And, like you said, the very firm you and I worked together, I had decisions I could make. I never had to go back office to figure out things. I could make decisions. And I think some of the decisions still exist in the firm, which I have made. I'm very grateful for that, for the confidence.
The second thing I did want to add on the sort of the downsides of empowerment, if you call it. One was, of course, mistakes we made. But the second and probably the more important thing is value system is key. When you empower people, I think what is paramount, what is extremely important is you hire people, and the people in the system who share a value system with the organization and the team. That's critical, because that's the framework in which decisions are made. If errors are made within the right value system, that's fine, stuff happens. But if errors are made because there is a value system mismatch, then it's a recipe for disaster. And I think that is one of my learnings, that often I've found that when I've empowered people and wrong outcomes or wrong decisions have been made, sometimes it traces back to someone having a different motive, an ulterior motive, aligning to a different value system. And to me, that's a trigger that they probably don't belong here.
Has that ever happened to you, where you've had someone you've acquired, it's a legacy resource you acquired, and you guys were on different, value system paradigms?
It's happened both ways. I have been part of groups where I realized I didn't align with the value system, so I actually moved out to a different group at a different part of the company. And I've also had team members who either we made a hiring error, or in some cases, because of an acquisition, someone's got, let's say, absorbed into the team, and you very quickly realize that that person operates on a different value system, and you've got to take care of that, because if one lets problems like those sort of almost fester, it can impact the whole team. Because as another of my mentors has once told me, especially as you become a leader and as you become more senior in the organization, people watch what you say, what you don't say, what you do, and what you don't do. And when there is common knowledge that there is a certain person or a certain set of people operating to a different value system, and you as the leader are tacitly quiet about that, then there is almost acceptance that this is acceptable behavior. And that's probably, as a leader, a failing as well. So, it's important to have that addressed sooner rather than later.
And I think the other aspect I have seen, Srikanth, is when you empower, you also need to have the ability to kind of take corrective action if you need to. Call a spade, as they say. Because sometimes, for a fear of confrontation, sometimes empowerment gets out of hand.
Yeah.
And that comes and breaks you too. So because you believe that, you're almost like overindulging with a child, it just goes out of control thereafter as well. So I think I've noticed that empowerment is important, but at the same time, too much of empowerment sometimes, like you said, when the value systems are not aligned, can be very disastrous, I feel.
True, and I think you're trying to. I understand what you're saying, and I agree. Is empowerment shouldn't be confused with absolving oneself of accountability. As a leader, one has accountability to your team, whether you're doing it yourself or whether someone else in the team is making the decision. It's all very well to empower, but then if things go wrong and you say, hey, I was not involved, you made the decision, that is not empowerment to me. That's absolution of or absolving oneself of responsibility, which I think is not correct.
Very well said. So, coming to the last question of our discussion, suggestions and advice based on your journey as a leader to people on this group. What would you suggest in terms of when you go trying to empower your organization or your teams?
I'd go back to what I just said. The first thing I'd say is know what values you're trying to build, whether it's a startup, whether it's a build up in a team, whether it's a larger company you're leading. It's very important to have clarity on what are the value systems around which you're trying to build. And there are no right or wrong answers, because by definition, a value system is a set of trade-offs between certain competing needs. I mean, we all want to do good by the world. We all want to make money. We all want to do, there are 10 different things, or whatever you call it. Let's say you have certain values. You want integrity, you want fairness, you want, let's say accountability, you want fun, etc. Now, obviously, some of them, in my view, are non-negotiable. But what's non-negotiable to me may not be to you. So having a very clear view of what are the value systems that you as a group or an organization or even a team want to stand for is very, very important. And then communicating that. And when I say communicate, it's not a presentation that you put out in front of people. You got to live the message, people see it in action. And often it's also communicated through war stories, like you and I have been creating film right now. So getting the value system right is critical. I think I would say that, especially for entrepreneurs, because the smaller the company, the easier it is to set or at least define what the value systems are. When you become bigger and bigger and bigger, communication becomes that much more difficult if you don't have a core to build around. That was number one. And I think the second thing I'd say is what is the locus of your, or reason, as they say in French, right? What's your purpose? What do you build around? And a lot of companies or a lot of startups will say, look, I've got to take care of my stakeholders. I've got to take care of investors. I've got to take care of employees. I've got to take care of clients. I've got to take care of a whole bunch of people. And it's all true. But often, again, there are trade-offs. And you've got to decide what are you building around. And in that sense, I'm going to use an oft-repeated word. At least what the organizations I've worked for, the ones which have been really successful, are the ones that are, again, client-centered, at least to me. Because maybe it's the nature of a services business that in a services business, you stand for your clients. You're trying to add value to your clients. You're trying to do it the right way. You're trying to do it ethically. You're trying to do it legally. You're trying to do it in a way that you do better than probably other people in the world. But you're solving problems for the client. And as long as you keep that at the center of things, I think things often work out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Srikanth. It's been such a refreshing conversation and a lot of interesting insights. I'm sure everybody will enjoy our talk today. Thank you for your time, and I wish you and Upgrad all success, and look forward to your participation in the group in the future as well.
Thank you, Ringo. It's been a pleasure, and I hope this is useful, and I hope we keep talking.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Take care.
Like, share, and subscribe to the EL Forum channel.